A sweep in Cincinnati. If this isn't rock bottom, I'm afraid to find out what will be for the Cardinals. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here on Thursday morning, August 15th, 2024. Oh, boy. The Cardinals are seeing their season crumble to dust before their very eyes. A sweep in Cincinnati, and not the good kind. I had to send the tweet last night. Sweeps aren't that hard. Just play the Cardinals. Cardinals had 3 days at Great American Ballpark, which we talk about being a very friendly hitter's park. Home runs fly out of there. The Reds found ways to do it in each game of the series. The Cardinals, not as much. They score one run, and 2 runs over the 3-game set in Cincy. Oli Marmol said they outslugged us. Well, they sure did that. Cardinals lose the game. They are now below 500, at risk of experiencing consecutive losing seasons for the first time since 94-95. And you'd have to go back even further to find the last time the Cardinals have endured consecutive losing seasons that were full seasons. Remember, 94 was cut short by the strike, only played 115 games that year. You'd have to go all the way back to 80-81 to find the last time the Cardinals in consecutive full seasons have had consecutive losing seasons. And as of right now, they're on track. They're tracking, baby. 71-91 last year, 60-61 here in 2024, as they sit tied with the Reds for second place and third place in the NL Central, 60-61. I mean, what do you say? What do you say at this point? Folks are upset, and I understand it. I mean, that was a pathetic display in Cincinnati. The offense just didn't show up for 3 straight games. And when the offense doesn't show up, I understand the characterization that I see out there at this point. There are people who are saying it looks like the Cardinals have stopped caring. They stopped trying. They don't care anymore. That's the way fans are seeing it play out. I don't know whether or not that's the case. And frankly, it doesn't matter. It harkens back to what I said on yesterday's podcast. It doesn't matter whether they're doing their best or there is harmony in the clubhouse or there's discord in the clubhouse or they like the manager, they don't like the manager. This is the year where the Cardinals had to fix it. They had to make the playoffs. They had to get back to Cardinal baseball. And right now, through 121 games, they aren't there. I don't expect the Cardinals manager, Oli Marmol, to say anything other than what he said last night. And I'll play some of the audio courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest, where he said, giving in is not an option. We believe in the guys we have in the clubhouse. It's kind of boilerplate. It's the kind of stuff that you'd expect to hear. I don't need Oli Marmol to say different than that. That doesn't bother me. There are Cardinals fans who are going to hear what he said and say, oh, I can't believe he said. What is he supposed to say? That's not me defending the product. I just don't know what he's supposed to say anymore. It's beyond words. Words aren't going to save the St. Louis Cardinals in 2024. Actions and better baseball will. Performance uptick will, if they can find it. It looks like a team doesn't care and isn't trying when the offense sucks. I mean, I think that's what that looks like, because how can you look? And there are ways to do it. There are probably ways to look like you're engaged and grinding and giving all you have when you're not feeling it at the plate. But if you go 2 seasons of not feeling it at the plate, is it maybe more that they just don't have the collection of players at this point to get the job done? And if that's the case, it's disappointing. It's disappointing because on paper, I think coming into each of the last 2 seasons, at least offensively, we looked and thought, this lineup has a chance to be pretty good. At least I did. And if I'm the sucker, then I'm the sucker. That's fine. Look, the Cardinals, I can remember being in spring training both years, honestly, the last 2 years, but especially this year, and remembering there was a confidence about the group and Oli Marmol and everybody, the way they talked about the offense and said, we will be a damaging lineup. It wasn't like a premonition. It wasn't like we hope to be a damaging lineup. It said we will be a damaging lineup is the way it was being characterized. We'll do damage. Well, you just played 3 games in Cincinnati, and you got to be judged on your merit. You got to be judged on what you do. And it's not giving me pleasure, but I don't think this Cardinals lineup is that. And if that's the case, that's a deeper problem than whether you do or you don't like the St. Louis Cardinals manager. Like, there is a level of being a field manager that you have to be able to inspire the players to play to their potential. Totally understand that. But I mean, when you're looking at several years in a row of feeling like let's just look at the outfield specifically. How long has it been that the Cardinals have had this trend of the outfielders that you think are going to be the next up take that step where they walk out of the starting blocks and you're like, here we go. This guy's at the big league level. He was a prospect. Now he's here. It's time to roll. And then they never really take that next step. They kind of stumble and their careers twist and turn and wind from there. And maybe they figure it out with another organization. Maybe they don't. But like the guys that we thought were going to be the next sort of end up stuck in the mud. And I'm thinking specifically right now about Lars Nootbaar. I sure hope that this is just a blip on Nootbaar's radar. And there have been Cardinals fans who I look, I don't want to say give credit to the fans who had been so critical, because it may be that y'all were right about saying, why has Nootbaar been anointed this, that, or the other, when we really haven't seen him, put together a full season of being the kind of guy that we talk about him as. That may end up being the case. I just feel like it's a little bit of a twisted narrative, because when you look at his numbers, Nootbaar's never been this bad. 2021, he had a 739 OPS. I talk about OPS plus all the time. League average is 100. In that rookie year, little sampling of 58 games, he had a 103 OPS plus. He's a little bit above league average. 2022, OPS of 788. Not a full season, but played 108 games. 788 is good. If the Cardinals had a lineup of 788 OPS guys, they'd be in first place in the division. I promise you this. 788 OPS, a 124 OPS plus. That was Nootbaar's 2022 season. It's like, okay. Remember, that was the year where he I think he even spent some time in AAA, but he came back. He kind of struggled with batting average, but with a 228 average, he had a 340 on base. He had great on base tool, you could tell. He took his walks. I mean, that to have a batting average of 228 and an on base of 340, there's some skill there. You could see it. It felt like 24-year-old Lars Nootbaar, he's going to be the next one. Last year, Nootbaar still had a pretty good season. Couldn't stay on the field the whole time, but racked up a career-high 503 plate appearances, hit 261, so the batting average was more acceptable, only struck out 99 times, walked 72 times. I mean, you're looking last year and seeing Lars Nootbaar, and like, even if this is the most he ever does, if he could just do this for the next 5 to 10 years, the Cardinals they finally have figured it out in their outfield. 784 was his OPS. He had 14 home runs. Like, on a season-long pace, he'd be a 15 to 20 home run guy. He'd steal 11. He'd steal 10 to 15 bases. He'd only strike out around 100 times. To hit 260, on base 367. I mean, Lars Nootbaar plays some solid corner outfield. Like, you thought, all right, they've got one here. Lars Nootbaar this season, multiple injuries, multiple stints on the injured list, and he's a 226 hitter right now with a 317 on base and a 370 slug for a 686 OPS. Like, if you were somebody coming into the year dogging Lars Nootbaar, I pushed back on it because there was nothing in his profile that suggested he was about to be a 686 OPS with a 92 OPS plus to be 8% below league average. That is what you've gotten if you're the St. Louis Cardinals from Lars Nootbaar this year. So, like, that's where the frustration is for me, because there's a lot of Cardinals in this lineup who feel like that. Brendan Donovan hasn't had his best year. I think he's performed a lot better than Nootbaar. His OPS is at least above 700, 725 OPS. That's a 102 OPS plus. That means offensively he's been 2% above league average. You need more than league average out of Brendan Donovan. For his career, he's a 113. That means 13% OPS plus, 13% above league average offensively. That's more where you need him. But he's close to that. He's within the range, within a couple of standard deviations of the mean, I would have to think. So it's nothing crazy in terms of the current decline for Donovan. And I think by the end of the year, he's still somebody that I would predict. He'll get closer to that career mark. He's a 759 OPS for his fledgling big league career. I think he'll get there. Right. But then there's, I mean, Jordan Walker. We can talk about Jordan Walker because he was not in the lineup again. I put out a video yesterday afternoon discussing that. We have context now to add to that conversation because the question that I wanted to be asked was asked, and John Denton tweeted the full quotes from Oli Marmol in response to it. Now, it not entirely was addressed because the aspect of, hey, Jordan Walker's actually reverse splits. Why is he this left-handed platoon guy? That question, I wasn't there, so I can't say what was discussed in the room. I just can tell you John Denton tweeted out an Oli Marmol quote, and then I'll give it to you. I don't really know why it is that there seems to be like a disconnect about this guy is a right-handed bat, and that's what we need, versus he doesn't actually excel against left-handed pitching, and yet that's the role that he's being slotted into. But Jordan Walker, let me finish this conversation about just the vast underperformance of this Cardinals lineup, and then I can get into the more specifics about Walker. But he did come into the game late yesterday, went 1 for 2. But just looking elsewhere in the lineup, I mean, Goldschmidt, 680 OPS. Look, if you thought, hey, Goldschmidt's going to be a problem this year for the Cardinals because they're never going to get his MVP caliber back. 2023, we saw it. It didn't look as good. They're never going to get that Goldie back that had a 981 OPS in 2022, and he was the most valuable player of the National League. Hey, don't count on that Goldie. He might not be coming back. He had an 810 OPS in 2023. That's a stark decline, 171 points. He went from 177 OPS plus. That means he's 77% above league average. That's how you win an MVP. Led the league in the category. To last year, he was a 120 OPS plus, which means he was only 20% above league average, but that's still very, very good. That's the thing. Like, if Goldie from last year was here this year, Cardinals are in a much better spot. He's got a 680 OPS. He's fallen off the map. And if you're Oli Marmol, you're like, well, do I stick with Goldie or do I accept that he's not that same guy anymore? It feels like it's a go down with the ship sort of territory for Oli Marmol, but Oli Marmol also has only the pieces that he has on his roster. When John Mozeliak brings up Jordan Walker and Oli Marmol doesn't seem to be on the same page about how that player should be utilized, or whether he is or isn't, that's the piece that he was given for Matt Carpenter. Whereas if you're really, let me just read the quote, because I think the quote from Ollie honestly added a little bit more confusion, which tells me I just don't know if everybody's on the same page about him being the guy that was subbing up for Matt Carpenter. Let me find it from John Denton's Twitter page, and then we can talk about it. And by the way, I was talking about players that are underperforming. There are obviously others. Arenado, 717 OPS. He's a perennial MVP candidate, and this year he's got a 717 OPS. Right? So, and Gorman was not in this lineup, but he's another example that I probably should bring up because that's 5 of your maybe 6 most productive hitters. The guys, if you were to rank them coming into the year in any particular order, I think you would have said Goldschmidt, Arenado, Wilson Contreras, Gorman, Jordan Walker, and probably Nootbaar as well in that 6-pack. 5 of the 6 have woefully underperformed. How does an offense become the damaging offense it thought it was going to be when that happens? Whose fault it is, my point is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Sweeping changes will be needed if this doesn't pan out. I don't think you can then, if they win 78 games, front office changes are going to happen, in my opinion. Field staff changes very well could happen. I'm not even going to get into, you guys want Oli Marmol's head on a stake. I get it. It doesn't matter to me because I think it's deeper than that, but I think everything needs to be evaluated. Let me just put it that way. You can't possibly have another losing season and at the end of it say, we're satisfied with the direction. To me, that means changes at the top. It means John Mozeliak, and I've been consistent about this. I said the goalposts do not move. Just because they had a couple of months throughout the summer where we thought it was going to be fine and that they were going to have a winning season, and so therefore I stopped talking about it, the goalposts are just where they were for me in early May. John Mozeliak, if this team doesn't get where it needs to go, John Mozeliak, with dignity, says it's time for somebody else to take a turn. I'm going to step aside and be more of a background role in my final year of my contract. That is the way this needs to go. If they do not make the playoffs, the goalposts do not move. Because it would signal an organizational decline that I think is within reason, difficult to imagine turning around without such substantive changes to the organization if they miss the playoffs again this year. Again, I ranted for an hour yesterday and said multiple times, hey, if they win 17 in a row, if they've got that in them, then you might say that would be very fluky at this point for this team, and I would probably agree with you. But if it happens, I'll leave room to say, hey, that's fine. Mozeliak got him there. However he got him there doesn't matter to me. He got him to the playoffs if that happens, and he can leave with his head held high on his own terms after 2025. But if they don't get there this year, I think he needs to begin that transition process to reorganize the front office and let that individual decide what needs to happen with the manager, with the coaching staff, with the player personnel. That would be the goalposts have not moved. That is where I have been since May, when we thought, hey, it looks like this might be a lost season. They better turn it around quick. And then to their credit, they turned it around quick. They went a couple of months of being in that way, and really 1 month, about 6 weeks of being in that way, but then they started the decline. We didn't notice it as much at first because the standings still looked okay, but then over the last couple of weeks, it's really gone the other direction, and now we're back to having that same conversation. It never stopped. It never changed. We just didn't think it would be as relevant. That's why we didn't talk about it as much. It was always in the periphery. It was always back there. But now that it's here and you're below 500 after 121 games, I bring it up again just to remind everybody that is, at least from where I sit, and you can tell me as a Cardinals fan if you feel differently, but from the way I evaluated this season coming in, last year, John Mozeliak told you all to be patient. And then trade deadline came. You had to sell because it just wasn't going to happen. And even Cardinals fans, I think, were understanding of that. Like, hey, that's just good business at this point. You got to do what you got to do. But, man, you can be disappointed about the way this season has gone. They skidded to the finish. They lost 91 games. And then they said, hey, we're going to fix this by going out and getting 3 starting pitchers. Did that. Hey, have you done enough? Yeah, we think we've got a competitive club. Okay, let's see it play out. I'm always going to give the benefit of the doubt to a front office and to an executive that has, for the bulk of his career in St. Louis, done a really nice job in terms of the results. He's gotten wins. He's gotten winning seasons. He's gotten this team to the playoffs. Did they win the World Series as much as you wanted them to? Probably not. Did they get deep into the playoffs as much as you want? Maybe not. But largely, I think the success should not be overlooked because other organizations don't have the stability the Cardinals have had over this stretch. And therefore, I gave the benefit of the doubt and said, that's fine. I'll wipe that slate clean. Mo deserves the opportunity to fix one bad year. But if it turns into 2, that signals 2023 was not an anomaly, right? It signals that the decline that some fans have been talking about since 2015, where they win 100 games, but the Cubs knock them out in the first round. And then from there, you kind of see a downward slope in the trajectory. There's a little blips in there. 2019, you made the run to the LCS, didn't win a game there, but you got there. 2021, were able to have the run late in September to be able to get yourself into the postseason, lost in the first game. So, there were still little blips where you could say, okay, if you squint and you blur the lines, there's really no stark decline for the St. Louis Cardinals organization. However, it would be undeniable, and for many it already is, but we'd have the proof in the pudding at this point. If you lose again this season, you don't make the playoffs again this season. To me, that would be enough to say, okay, you've tried to swap out managers a couple times. You've tried to overhaul areas of the rosters a couple times. Now it would be time to say maybe it's deeper. Maybe it's far deeper than this, than a Flex Seal tape is going to change, is going to fix, is going to hold. So that's the macro. Let's get back to the micro, though. Talking about Jordan Walker, I had alluded to the John Denton tweets. I then found myself in a 7-minute rant about the state of the organization. So here, let's get back to it, because I think on a more base level, on a more micro level, this Jordan Walker situation is indicative of maybe some of the stuff we're talking about. St. Louis Cardinals manager, this is from John Denton's feed. Oli Marmol on Jordan Walker being used primarily just versus left-handed pitching. Quote, the big league team has a need, and it's a right-handed bat. So that's the simplest way to look at it. It's not May, it's the end of the year. You have limited amount of games left, and our biggest struggle has been against left-handed pitchers. Yes, we know it's only Kershaw in Milwaukee has all right-handed starters for the most part, so we're aware of that going into how we made this decision. And his point there is Cardinals face 6 of their next 7 starters are going to be against righties. So you brought up Walker at a time where you're actually not going to face a bunch of lefties if that's the plan to use him. But there's also left-handed relievers where Walker can take an at-bat against. We have a need versus lefties, and it has to be someone who can play an outfield position. That's the quote from Oli Marmol. The part at the end, I mean, there's a lot of parts of this that are interesting. The part that admitting what had been reported by multiple outlets, that the reason Jordan Walker is here is to be a right-handed bat against left-handed pitching. That's their biggest struggle. They're one of the worst teams in the league against lefties, and it's not hard to figure out how that happens when Arenado and Goldschmidt have had the struggles of their season that they've had, and Jordan Walker has had the struggles of his season that he's had, and that's 3 of your most 4 prominent right-handed bats in terms of expectations coming into the year. And then guys like Gorman, who last year you were like, hey, he can actually hang against lefties sometimes, hasn't been able to. Nootbaar hasn't been overly splitty, but has just been bad in general. Hasn't been as productive in general. So, like, that all kind of, you mix it up, and what do you get? It's an offense that can't hit lefties because they've got one righty meeting expectations in their lineup. Well, 2. Mason Wynn. But Contreras has really been the other one that has handled himself. So when you have that, you're like, all right, this is what we need. When Carpenter goes on the injured list, bring up a righty because the bench has been too left-heavy anyway. Here's one of the things I don't understand. I'm trying to decide exactly how to pick this apart and identify what I'm feeling with this. First thing that jumps out at me is, well, the fact that Jordan Walker doesn't have the splits that would indicate he should be the guy against lefties, first of all. Like reverse splits. We've talked about this multiple times. So that's a little bit funky to begin with. And then the notion that it has to be someone that could play an outfield position. Why? Does Oli Marmol even believe this? Is my thought. That's where I say, is there a disconnect? Does he need the outfield position? Because if he did, I feel like he would trust Jordan Walker to go play outfield regardless, because he is a data guy. He understands the splits. Unless they have an internal reason for why the last 3 years Walker's splits have been reversed and they think that's suddenly about to change, which maybe they do, I don't know. Then he wouldn't seem to be the guy for the job. But if it has to be an outfielder, all right. My first thought, and again, I was on the air yesterday and I read this quote from Denton Live and I kind of flubbed because I was tweeting out. I'm like, if that's really all this is, like this was the confirmation from Ollie that yes, this is a platoon role for Jordan Walker. He's going to play against lefties because that's the need of the club right now. We need better performance against lefties. Leave alone for a moment the fact that Jordan Walker's not that guy statistically over the last 3 years. Let's pretend he is. Let's just pretend that he is. He's not, but let's say he is. If that's the case, it's very much a niche role for a guy like Jordan Walker, a top prospect who you've yanked him around already as an organization, right? They brought him up in 23. They were like, oh, he's not really hitting enough fly balls, and his defense, the manager doesn't seem to trust his defense in San Francisco in that wide outfield, so we're going to send him back down. 3 weeks later, kind of an embarrassing moment for the organization. It happens, though. Look, Jackson Holliday came up for the Orioles this year, went down. Embarrassing, right? But people said it'll be fine, and it was. He came back up, and now he's slugging. He's doing great for the Baltimore Orioles. So that can happen, and it's not the end of the world. I'll even kind of take back. Not that embarrassing for the Cardinals. It happens. Those can still become success stories. Mike Trout's first year, look at his numbers. Wasn't good, right? It happens. But then this year, kind of the same story. He's up with the team. He spends all offseason working on his defense. I think his defense did improve from the little bit we saw from him at the beginning of the year. And then the offense isn't there, so they send him back down again. Oh, disgraced. I mean, that's just, right? Like you feel bad about it. Everybody feels bad about it. They wanted to work out with Jordan Walker. But then he starts to catch his stride. He's starting to roll a little bit. Finds his footing recently. 5 home runs since July 25th or whatever the mark was. He put together 2 home runs in a row on Saturday, Sunday, I think over the weekend. Yeah. It was either Friday, Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday. So he's coming in hot. And it's like, all right, we're going to make the decision to bring him back up. I thought at first, Jordan Walker's getting hot. Cardinals see it. They see that they have a need for some production at the big league level. Well, let's try it. Hey, Matt Carpenter, your back hurts. And it's not that I thought the injury to Carpenter was fake. I just thought very good timing, right? If he's been dealing with it on and off, now is a good time to kind of shelve it because frankly, Jordan Walker playing every day and then being able to slide somebody useful to the bench, more useful than having Carpenter. Not because Carpenter hasn't been fulfilling his role, but his role is a limited role inherently. His role is to not play a position defensively and to have a league average bat. He's a 99 OPS plus. So, that's limited. That doesn't give a manager a lot of utility, especially when the other guys on your bench are usually left-handed. One of Nootbaar, Gorman, Burleson is typically on the bench, along with Brandon Crawford, who's left-handed. And you might say, well, Brendan, Matt Carpenter is a much better pinch hit option than Brandon Crawford. Brandon Crawford's numbers are bad. I would say, I know, but the Cardinals insist on having him on the roster. So what do you want the manager to do? Right? But he's in a perfect world, that Crawford role is somebody who can at least hit league average, so that when you do use him in a pinch hit opportunity like the Ciani spot the other week against Hector Neris, it at least makes sense. But instead, it didn't make sense because Brandon Crawford doesn't have the juice in 2024 as an offensive player. He's shown that for 121 games. Yes, in a limited role, so it's not entirely fair to Crawford, but it's not spiteful to point out that Brandon Crawford has not been particularly useful for this Cardinals team. And I think anybody paying close attention to the way that the bench has had to be utilized would agree with that. And Oli Marmol might even agree with it. I don't know, privately. But the notion of he's always going to have to back his guys publicly, I think sometimes that leads to the disconnect and maybe even fans feeling like, oh my gosh, this guy's so full of it. What is he watching? Well, there are different things that I think in that role you have to sometimes do and say to be able to look people in the eye in that room. So I try to understand that and keep aware of that. But in the context of this Jordan Walker decision coming up for Matt Carpenter, it's kind of hard to even still look and say, oh, well, you've got a lefty off the bench. You've got Brandon Crawford. Well, not really. And so before the Carpenter injury, you could have made the case of, hey, you know who would actually kind of build out the Brandon Crawford spot, but from the right-handed angle on a platoon would be Thomas Saggese. Find a 40-man spot. And I get it. Those are valuable, and you don't want to waste them. But by the same token, there's going to be a couple of guys this offseason that the Cardinals, they're quad A players or they're guys who haven't even really come up much, and they're going to be DFA'd in the offseason. It could happen today if you needed to. And if that's the reason it's Walker over Saggese, I think that's crazy. I think that's crazy, and it doesn't maximize the utility of this Cardinals roster for the hope of, well, we've got this thing tomorrow that we might need. But you've had those kind of guys on the roster. Luke Baker's down there. The reason I think it's crazy that you say it has to be an outfielder, and again, I don't know where that's coming from. Oli Marmol said it. I don't know where that's coming from, though, because to me, it doesn't seem logical. So if that's just the thing that he's got to say because they plopped an outfielder into his lap, and he's like, I'm not going to say, Mo, what are you doing out loud in public, but if we're really supposed to believe it has to be an outfielder and take that at his word, that's kind of hard to wrap your head around because Matt Carpenter's not an outfielder. If you want to trade like for like, trade a left-handed bat who doesn't play a position and can hit league average for a right-handed bat who doesn't play a position and can hit league average or better. Luke Baker would be the answer to that. Instead, Luke Baker's not here, and in the offseason, he probably gets, traded for nothing or DFA'd for a roster spot without ever having a chance to show it. This is the John Mozeliak pattern for years. It's confusing to me. If not Luke Baker, because you do want some utility there for somebody that can play some positions, Saggese could be that answer. And at least Ivan Herrera would have more utility because he's a third catcher that if you needed to have a catcher in there. But he's largely a DH who we know can hit league average. So if the role is just needing somebody to face lefties, I guess the reason it has to be an outfielder is because when Contreras is going to DH to get another righty in the lineup, Pages would end up being the catcher. There's nowhere you can't just put a DH out there. But that's where it gets to, where are we with Paul Goldschmidt? If you're really trying to maximize the wins this year, does he have to play every game against righties, against hard-throwing righties? We saw him sit once last week against one, but it hasn't really happened since. That was more of he needs an off day every now and again. It was a lot of games in a row. So that wasn't like an organizational shift on Paul Goldschmidt. That was just a one-off. But these are the kinds of things I think are at least worth talking about as you try to maximize each day's lineup and try to salvage this thing, which if you just watch the Cincinnati series, you'd say is a sinking ship. They could turn it around, but they're playing who's coming to town on Friday, right? It's the Dodgers. It's not like this thing's going to get easier now. It gets a lot more difficult. It's all playoff teams that you see for the next 2.5 to 3 weeks. That's it. That's all that's on the schedule is playoff teams. The Reds aren't a playoff team, but now they're tied with you in the standings because of what you let them do to you. And back to Jordan Walker, if we thought for sure what Ollie said is what it needed to be, even though Matt Carpenter can't play outfield, this needed to be an outfielder for the reasons I just outlined of that might be the only way to get the guy in the lineup if you're also going to start Contreras as the DH and fit in a right-handed hitting catcher when you play those lefties, which I'm past the point of caring whether that's Pages or Herrera. I get it that Pages has not thrown out anybody stealing either, and Herrera's probably the better bat. But they like the job Pages does behind the plate, and I'm okay with that. I'm not going crazy about that. But like if you really were just desperate to improve against left-handed pitching, that would be the trade-off. And you'd say, well, Herrera can't throw anybody out. I think the way that the pitchers are not holding runners, nobody's going to throw anybody out. But is the Herrera switch an invitation to opposing base runners to even ratchet it up even further and dare him to try to throw you out because he's worse at it than the other two? Maybe that would be the case. So that could be the reason you'd want an outfielder. Because look, Tommy Pham would be playing against those lefties. A center fielder would be playing against those lefties, and that's going to be a left-handed hitter because it's Nootbaar and Victor Scott that are your center field options. So, like, I think if you boil it down, like Donovan's going to probably be in there because he's not overly splitty. There would be one spot. It could be Nootbaar's. They just have too many lefties. And so I think that's what boxes them into it wanting to be a right-handed hitter because it's the only way to fit him in the lineup, right, is the outfield. Because if you called up Herrera, well, he's not going to play the outfield. And if you replace Goldie, if Herrera even plays some first, it's like, or Burleson plays some first, not Burleson, Luke and Baker. If one of those guys is the right-handed bat that you call up and you're replacing Goldie as a right-handed bat, you're not getting more right-handed against lefties like you wanted to do. So that wouldn't provide the utility the Cardinals are looking for. So you just have to actually dig even deeper to go, okay, if it has to be an outfielder, I think it's a little bit crazy to say simply because it didn't have to be an outfielder when Matt Carpenter was there, but the goal changes if it's a right-handed bat because then you're actually considering using that guy against lefties, whereas when Carpenter was in the role, you weren't. So that's the reason. And I'm talking my way through it as well and kind of analyzing and evaluating. So I can see the point there why you'd say that at this point. Let's pull that string. Let's play that out. Get another one from Memphis because all you're doing is stunting the growth of Jordan Walker, who finally has hit his stride. Let him continue to cook at Memphis if you're not ready to bring him up to play him every day. Okay, so who's the outfielder you take from Memphis that can be the right-handed bat that can play against lefties? At first, I had mentioned this, and then I kind of got sidetracked. When I was tweeting about it live on the air, I said, well, call up Matt Koperniak and find a 40-man spot. Well, he's a left-handed bat. Like, I just miffed that when I was on the air, and that was my bad. So I then deleted that tweet and re-explained what I was saying and added that I sent a bad tweet. So transparency, putting it all out there, like always. And I'm like, okay, so what other right-handed bat do they have that's an outfielder in Memphis? And the answer is they don't. It's like Fermin would be the best option, and they've tried that multiple times. And if you're talking about a 40-man spot, right? So the truth is the organizational issues go deeper than just this being a curious situation for Jordan Walker to be in. It's like they didn't even have another right-handed hitting outfielder in their minor league depth to just call up for a couple of weeks just to fill that role if they thought it was so valuable to have. And ideally, it would be a right-handed bat that actually was better against left-handed pitching, which Jordan Walker is not. Alfonso Rivas was playing an outfield spot yesterday for the Memphis Redbirds. The only guys that you could even say the Cardinals went out in the offseason as far as minor league depth and got, it's guys they just scooped up off of waivers from other teams and didn't pan out. It was like Buddy Kennedy, Jared Young, Alfonso Rivas, and Rivas is left-handed. Like, they don't have, how can you not have any right-handed hitting outfield depth in the minors when you're so left-handed heavy at the big league level? Would that not have been something you would have had to pay a little money for or prioritize in a trade to say, we just got to find this piece to try to stock our, it's not just the major league team that you go, the roster doesn't make sense. It's the minors too, that they just don't have the pieces to fill little niche roles like this, to where now they have to take a top prospect who is finally cooking and they say, he's the only right-handed bat that we can call up because at least he can play the outfield against left-handed pitching. Whereas, like, if it's Luka Baker or if it's Ivan Herrera, that doesn't, you can't necessarily figure it out in the same way. That's an indictment on Mozeliak. That's like basic stuff that they just don't have in the organization. And it's because when you look at every time they pick somebody up, it's because they don't have a choice. You claim a guy on waivers, he doesn't get to pick whether or not he wants to come to your team. Can they sign a minor league free agent? As crazy, Moises Gomez would have been, you know what I mean? Like, that would have been perfect if they still had Moises Gomez. But what did they do with him? They had him on the 40-man until they never gave him a shot, never tried to nurture the opportunity. Maybe he's not big league caliber, right? That's fine. But that's more of an indictment on the player development, on the fact that they didn't replace that when they said, yeah, you can go be a free agent. Moises Gomez might have got called up on this Matt Carpenter thing if not for him being granted his unconditional release a couple of weeks ago. Not because he was having a good season with Memphis. He very much wasn't. But if really all you're describing is needing a body who could potentially do some damage against lefties and could play outfield, Moises Gomez could have been that answer. It still may not have happened, though, because John Mozeliak might have been protecting the 40-man spots like it's buried treasure, like it's gold. Even though I can find people who have less utility on the 40-man than what this niche role would be, and those same guys are going to end up being DFA'd in the offseason. So what are we doing here, Cardinals, when it comes to this fixation with the 40-man? And maybe my comment on Moises Gomez, I didn't realize how bad he had been. 583 OPS this year. Yeah, the time for Moises Gomez was kind of circa 2022 when he was, or even last year when he hit 30 homers. And again, I don't think he was ever going to be big league caliber when you look at the numbers, the strikeout numbers. But it's just to show, like, if that was your best option and he wasn't a good option, how is it not something that John Mozeliak is able to figure out in the offseason? This isn't the same as, we joke about every free agent that the Cardinals signed had to be somebody that they already knew or that lived close by or that was convenient. And it's like the scope of players that are eligible to become a Cardinal is so slim. Brandon Crawford wasn't on the list, and then out of absolute necessity, they had to pay him more than he was worth because they just needed a body to be a shortstop. Because that's how far it had gone to where they were like, wow, we don't have any depth. I mean, how does that happen? Is the Rolodex that slim of agents and players that this front office feels like it can call? There have got to be players that you can get. There have got to be trades that you can. Can they not talk to these executives from other teams? They trade with the same three teams. I don't know. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. Like, there are thousands of players out there on various teams. You don't think you could go to AJ Preller and say, hey, who are your guys that fit this description? He looks for reasons to make trades. I think you could probably do it. But why? It doesn't ever seem to happen. And now the Cardinals are left again with just this gaping hole. There's not minor league free agents out there that they can identify and they've scouted and they say, hey, this is the role that we need. It's not just the big league level that the Cardinals have this deficiency this year. I think it's the minors too. And it's now impacting the big league team because they thought their best. And when I say they, I'm talking about Mozeliak. If Oli Marmol was on board with this Jordan Walker thing, it doesn't look like it based on the fact that he's not being used as an everyday player. Because if you're Oli Marmol, I think you would understand that Jordan Walker needs to play every day. We need to nurture this player. So now that he's here, I would like to think that Oli Marmol would adjust. Even if he didn't think that this was the way that it needed to go down, I would like to think that Oli Marmol would adjust and put him in the lineup every day. You also have to look at what you trust to be able to do that day and win that day. And I think he still thinks Lars Nootbaar is the better option on a day-to-day. And I don't think I personally agree with that right now. You could make a case that Lars Nootbaar needs a stint in Memphis to try to work his stuff out. Because, again, I read you the numbers of Lars Nootbaar earlier in the show. I think Lars Nootbaar is going to end up being a just fine to good MLB player. I don't think he'll be a perennial all-star. He might, but there seems to be maybe too many holes, at least this year. Maybe this year is the anomaly for Nootbaar. But he's had 780 OPSs before this season, and that would be perfectly fine and dandy, and good corner outfield defense is going to be a valuable player in the league for a long time. But if right now he's struggling and you want to be more productive against lefties and you think Jordan Walker can be that, then maybe that's the switch you make. Nootbaar's not overly splitty, but he's not overly good right now either at the plate. So I don't know. And here's the thing. Are we getting maybe too in the weeds when we're talking about the AAA outfield depth? Have we gone too far? Do we need to go touch grass? Maybe, but we do a daily Cardinals podcast talking about the team. Are we going to get some stuff wrong? I'm sure. I'm sure there are things that if there are things I'm misinterpreting of this move, that's fine. Cardinals can text me if I'm getting it wrong. I mean, if they're worried about what I'm saying on a podcast because I got some details wrong, they got bigger problems because I'm nobody. So it's weird, man. It's a weird spot to be in that we're trying so hard to figure out this Jordan Walker thing. Does that tell you just instinctively that it's wrong? The one thing they can't be doing is having him at the big league level and not playing. It's the one thing they cannot be doing unless they are trying to find every little margin of this roster to win that day and save all their jobs, right? I mean, because again, it all needs to be evaluated from Mozeliak on down at the end of the season if they don't make the playoffs. So is the best, most good use of trying to win that day to have Jordan Walker on your bench in case you do face a tough lefty so that he can play and take him on? Maybe. Again, his splits aren't conducive to that. So it's not even that much of an advantage if that's the niche role that he's going to fill. And it is going to hamper his development. But if you're not going to be here next year, his development is maybe not top of mind. They're managing almost like a team. And when I say they, it's from Mozeliak on down. It's Marmol included. But they're managing like this is every day is the last day, which is I don't think is the case, by the way. Today's an off day, so maybe heads roll today. That's what Cardinals fans want to see is heads rolling. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they let the season play out. But at the end of the season, if it's what it is, then yeah, you're going to see changes. I don't know which changes, but you're going to see changes. You have to. Otherwise, they will have nowhere to hide. They can push back against criticism all they want. It will be undeniable that the organization will be on a downward spiral if this team doesn't make the playoffs. And therefore, you cannot continue to say we're working hard, our front office is working hard, our coaching staff is working hard, our players are working hard. Work is irrelevant. Work is a prerequisite. Winning baseball is what counts, and they know this. They all know this, but, sometimes I feel like it has to be said. So I am going to go ahead and play Oli Marmol from postgame because some folks may not have heard it. It is always courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest for these road games that I'm not there actually capturing the audio. At home games, some of the times I'm there. But in this case, road game, courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest, but going to play it for you. Let me know what you think.
Took some really good swings. They hit the ball hard. They did damage, and they made us pay. We didn't.
Out over 10-1 in this series.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. I mean, you look at, we sprayed a couple hits out there. I think 2 doubles today, one by Mason, one by Donovan. But outside of that, just kind of sprayed a couple singles in there. And you look at their line, and 5 homers, double. There's a lot of damage. You look at yesterday, damage. The day before, damage. So scored 1 the first game, 1 the second game, and then what we did today. So they outslugged us. They took some really good swings, and it was more than enough.
What do you look at in that 5th inning? I mean, they hit a couple home runs. You get Kyle out of there. Games can still turn in this series. But
yeah.
That is some rather uncharacteristic, even ugly play. I know it only resulted in one run. But how do you look at just like where the team was at that moment?
I wouldn't describe. Donnie made an error. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't describe it as where the team was at that moment. More so, that's not where the game
I'm
turned.
not saying that's where the game turned.
They outslugged us. That's where the game was. Yeah.
The 5th inning, Donovan leads off with a double and then never moves past it. Does that just kind of sum up where?
It does. And that was a frustrating inning there because you got some guys that, I mean, you talk to Goldie about what his approach is and what he's trying to do compared to what the outcome was, and it's just the opposite, right? So it's hard to get on him he's trying to do the thing that you would expect him to do, and it's just not coming out the way he wants at the moment, and that's frustrating for him. It's frustrating for everybody. This guy is working his ass off and not getting a whole lot of reward in those type of situations. So, yeah, that was one that was frustrating based on leadoff double and the guy still standing there after 3 outs.
You've said a bunch of times your bunch is not going to give in. Do you worry about the spirit of when you're going through this sort of thing?
I don't. Because of our group and our staff and some of the leadership in that clubhouse. Yeah, you don't want to get swept here in Cincy, I'll tell you that. But as far as giving in, that's not an option.
Yeah, you have the off day and then homestand against obviously some really good teams. How do you regroup and get ready for it?
One game at a time.
You've talked a lot about how the fight this team had to get back into contention, to get back into winning. Now you're at a losing record. Tom, the clock is ticking, as you mentioned earlier today. But what do you make of where it is right now?
What do you mean?
60-61. You guys have talked a lot about making the playoffs. Just the nature of this, how much work you put in to get back to a winning record, and how quickly you're now back under it.
Yeah, we fought really hard to have that stretch that we did, and some guys are on fumes and some guys are feeling okay about where they're at, and we're going to continue to take our best shot. Nothing changes. Yeah.
Do you draw confidence then from what it took to get out the first time?
Yeah, we've been here before. Tough series here, I'll tell you that. It's not what we wanted at all. But as far as giving in, like I said earlier, it's just not an option.
Cardinals manager Oli Marmol talking after last night's 9-2 loss to the Reds. I didn't even mention, Kyle Gibson, why'd they lose? They gave up 1 billion home runs. That's what happened. They didn't score. They gave up 1 billion home runs, and that is how they lost. Reds hit home runs in their park. Cardinals were eligible to do so, didn't hit any. You hear Ollie there. He says they were outslugged. Yep, they were. The Reds were great. The Cardinals were terrible. In terms of offensive production, the Reds did things that win you baseball games. The Cardinals did not. And that's why I said off the top, what is Ollie supposed to say differently? If you're mad, if you think Oli Marmol stinks, then, whatever. But I think those 3.5 minutes is about all he could have said. And kept his resolve. He's going to keep having his guys back. I respect that. I respect Oli Marmol. I just think, what is there to say after getting your butts handed to you 3 times in a row like that? He could do the pound the table thing, and that you hear a couple of those answers are kind of short answers where there's frustration. Of course he's fuming. But at the same time, it's the job of him and the players and the front office to fix it. Front office's job is to put him in the best position to be able to fix it. I don't think they've done that to this point, but he's also got to find the resolve. And he trusts his group, and that trust was rewarded once this year in May when it looked like this team was dead and buried. He said, we've got the right group. He insisted it. And they then for a month and a half showed that maybe they did. Now it's that same group that's coming into hard times again. The good stories in sports are the ones where nobody sees it coming. So I'm going to leave room for the Cardinals to fix this thing and turn it around. That's why I say for people who want heads to roll today, I think that's wrong. I think that would be the wrong move by the Cardinals. But maybe that's not taking into effect enough of what could happen from a bump of changes being made, right? Let's not just act like this season is over. If statistically, standings wise, it's not quite over, let whatever changes you think could inspire a run at the end, let those things happen. I think they have enough respect for Oli Marmol and for the job his coaching staff has done, has the work that they've put in to allow it to continue. And that might be disappointing to some people, but I just don't, and again, I might be 12 hours from now doing a podcast talking about there have been coaching changes, but I don't think that's where it is. I think they're going to allow it to play out. But like I said, I wasn't in Cincinnati, so I don't have the vibe captured maybe the way some people do. If you're just waiting with bated breath to say heads need to roll, I think, if you think the season's over, it might be over anyway. So that could be the reason that they don't do anything. I think you let it play out, and then you can evaluate and say, hey, we gave it our best shot with this group, and now this group needs to maybe be adjusted. Would be the way I could see the Cardinals handling it. If you want it to be a different way, I understand your thought process. And as fans, everybody kind of has the right to feel the way they feel about it. But I just can do the best that I can evaluating and looking at what's going on. So let me know, Cardinals fans, where you're at. It's bleak. I mean, it is. It is absolutely bleak to say the Cardinals are now below 500 when it looked like they had turned the corner some number of weeks ago. And what can you say? What can you say that hasn't already been said, I should say, until the Cardinals turn it around? And the beauty of it is there will be no doubt at the end. And that's part of the reason, too, I say let them play this out. Let them play this out because they have been insistent to this point that it's the right group. And if they feel like it is, we're going to know by the end of the next few weeks because you're playing all playoff teams for the next 3 weeks. It's only playoff teams. Yankees are in there. Dodgers are in there. Brewers in there twice. Twins are in there. We're going to know. Padres for 4 at home. Mike Schilt coming back to town. We're going to know. So, all right, Let the big dog eat. I've been patient with this process, but my goalposts have never moved. If it's not urgency to make sweeping changes on August 15th, and that's what frustrates people, I'm not criticizing you for feeling that way. I want to see it play out, but I also think there are obvious ways to question what's going on right now from an organizational perspective as well as an on-field perspective. If you think the Cardinals have mailed it in, I don't know if that's the case. Again, I understand the characterization is one that would be not taken kindly by the people that are putting the work in, but I also think, like, whatever it is about the vibe of the clubhouse and the vibe of this roster, they've got to figure it out themselves if they want that characterization to be, taken away. And maybe they don't care how it's being characterized. That's fine too. But people are looking at this team and going, I'm kind of apathetic about this team because it looks like it's apathetic about itself. And that is as big of an indictment as you can give. Whether it's the case or not, like I started the show saying, it doesn't functionally matter whether they've mailed it in or not. I think it's going to look like that when you give up 5 bombs and your pitcher doesn't execute and he throws pitches that are meatballs and they hit him for home runs. It's going to look like your pitcher doesn't care. Maybe he's just not executing, not performing. It's not a lack of, don't assign lack of ability on a given day to lack of want to. But there's also an aspect of want to, refusal to be this mediocre team. Refuse it as a group. That's the beauty of sport. They'll get to pick their path. Whatever anybody on the outside says about it, they should ignore. It's irrelevant. What happens that is relevant is how many games they win. They get a chance to go win a bunch of games. They're not sitting in a position to be able to, and Ollie said, I push back on the notion of whatever, Derek's question was asking about if that's kind of where the game, you kind of sense that, did the team kind of have a letdown moment and then it kind of impacted their play. And Ollie said, I push back on that. Push back on it. That's fine. It doesn't matter whether that characterization is fair, unfair, or otherwise. If you don't win enough games, everything's going to be evaluated. And that is fair. That is the way the business of baseball works. I have extended the optimism to say I think this Cardinals team can pull it out. They can figure it out. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But how many games in a row can they play like they played in Cincinnati before you go, I can't keep looking like that, or I'm the sucker, right? So there's no spite in it, but this team's not playing well. So let me know your thoughts, and we'll talk to you soon. Cardinals don't play a game tonight on Thursday, but they will be back at it Friday night at Busch. Dodgers coming to town. No time like the present for the Cardinals to turn things around. Give me your thoughts in the comments, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.